The MK party will today hold a pivotal media conference regarding the current political situation and ongoing developments in South Africa. The party will converge broad strategic organizational issues to the national discourse and the future trajectory of the party in the South African political landscape. We also saw former EFF member Floyd Shivambu joining the party. But what is the current state of the MK party and the EFF? Let's now invite political analyst Sanusha Naidu, who's going to weigh in on this conversation. Sanusha, very good morning to you. Thank you so much for making time for us. So today you have this press briefing, which will be led by the MK party's leader, Jacob Zuma, while on the other end, you have another press briefing that will be taking place in Cape Town with the 10 expelled MPs. What should we read into this?
Good morning, Aldrin, and good morning to the viewers. I think it tells us that the party needs to start thinking about what kind of anchor is becoming part of its stabilization of institutions, structures, etc. I think it also tells us that what has been quite interesting in the run-up from the election, where the party had done spectacularly well in the context of its performance, both at the national level and within the provincial structures, not only in KZN. But I think it also tells us that the party has been through this ebb and flow, this kind of instability of waves. And the press briefing of the 10 MPs that are now that have been basically removed from Parliament, and they now giving their kind of briefing, kind of tells you that the party needs to find that cohesiveness. It needs to find that coherence, because if it's not finding that coherence, then of course these kinds of levels of internal disruptions to the party doesn't really bode well for what kind of one voice it speaks with. But again, the party will probably say in the press briefing today that these are all just minor irritations for them, that in fact that the party is still very much a solid internal structure, that it still has very much a coherent and a stable center. So I think we have to be prepared for that kind of narrative, which has always been dismissive of what has been some of the internal challenges that have afflicted the party going forward from the election.
Yeah, and here's the other thing about this, and I was thinking about the political party itself. This is now the MK party, formed or launched on the 16th of December. Whether they were prepared for the type of results that they got during the elections, and whether they'd put in adequate systems. And I want to go back to this particular point, and that is looking at the Tuxman stages of group development, the 5 stages of group development. And I wonder whether the MK party is perhaps at the storming phase, which deals with the arguing amongst members, vying for leadership positions, differences in point of view and personal styles becoming evident. Could that be where the party finds itself currently, and how does it get out of that?
Well, let's go back to your point, your first point in this question. I think the question around were they prepared for the performance and the kind of performance they would have gained at the polls in the election that they basically put together, and you say that, were they prepared for it? I think if you follow the narrative, they were actually quite adamant that they were going to get 2/3 or even get over 60% of the vote. Now, if that's the narrative that has been crafted within the party's articulation of where it saw itself within the electoral landscape of South Africa, and it did fairly well. So it shouldn't actually be a surprise for them to have done well, because they've already created the narrative amongst themselves that it's going to be a major success for them at the polls. So it kind of is a bit intriguing, or it contradicts itself if the argument is that they were never prepared for this kind of performance and success that they saw. So that kind of finds itself on a bit of a shaky ground in that way. Are they at the storming level? I think in many ways, the question would be what was the intention around the creation of the party? And we all know what the intention, objective, and goal priority was of the party. But in itself, it circles back to that point that if they were prepared for all of this, and being the kind of official opposition in our political landscape as designated in Parliament, then of course, how would you have worked towards that? So I think the two questions are interrelated. The question of preparedness for what was the result and the outcome, and the question of storming. Because I think those two kind of say, well, you've already prepared yourself to do well, so there shouldn't be that storming. So that tells you that perhaps the party internally still has to find that kind of centering of its leadership, particularly in a sense where you don't only have one particular personality within the party that anchors around the party, but rather think about where is it going beyond this. And I think that is the organizational structure that I feel has not really been given the kind of credence, the kind of ventilation and manifestation that should have happened. And so I think the storming is a bit of an outlier right now, because yes, there are very strong personalities in the party, but at the same time, their internal dynamics have actually started to fragment even before the party could actually do well at the polls or contest the election with Jabulani Kumalo.
Yeah, and here's the thing about this, looking at the allegations that are made by the 10 MPs, well, former MPs now at least, that are seeking legal intervention, is that you have Judge John Hlophe, former Judge John Hlophe, who is the leader of the MK party in Parliament. Do you think that the leader of the MK party would have gone through the procedures that the party has followed to say that, listen, have you followed the right steps in terms of also giving the party members that are accused in this statement of being saboteurs to actually respond to these allegations before you take a decision to remove them from that position?
Well, I think we would like to think that those processes have been followed. But then again, I think the challenge here is not only about whether the processes have been followed. The challenge is, how do these people get on the list? How did they get sworn in as MPs? And then you come after the fact and say, well, these were saboteurs, or these were people that had other kinds of intentions, and we feel that they have brought the party, or they've challenged the internal integrity of the party, and they shouldn't have been on the list in the first place. That comes back to your question prior about the organizational architecture. So I think it seems to me that the first step in this whole kind of architecture of the MK party was to basically say, let's contest the elections. Let's see what happens. This is what we're going to do. We probably have a good way of getting into the kind of position we are within the electoral landscape of the politics of the country. And then let's start sorting out all the other stuff internally. So I think those are some of those dynamics of the fragmentation, because I think the way you structure your organizational architecture, whether you're a party or a movement or or civil society, etc., is you got to actually ask yourself is, why did we come to this point with the 10 MPs that have been asked to be removed from Parliament because we felt that they didn't really fit the fit, so to speak. And I think that's the crisis right now, because you can't come after the fact, because everything has to follow in the sense that you know that you have a good internal structure, you've got good leadership structures, you've got good people that are going to put the objectives of the party forward. And if that hasn't happened, and you're coming back and you're chopping and changing and you're shifting and moving people around, that doesn't tell you that the organizational structure was coherent from the start. And I think that's going to be critical as well.
Yeah, and with that said as well, is the MK party is now the official opposition in the country. And if we look, for instance, at, was it the UDM secret ballot matter before the Constitutional Court emphasizing the important role that Parliament plays, not only as an oversight structure, but also as a representative of the people. And I wonder, when we look at people that have voted for the MK party, people that have supported the MK party, do they look at the MK party now and say that, well, listen, there is a bit of instability, but I'm confident that the party will find stability at some point? Or do you have some party members or even party supporters that have just given up?
Well, it's difficult to say. I think the only way we'll be able to gauge that kind of perception attitude would be to look at what is being polled. I know we've had a lot of debate about polling and whether the polls were reflective of the outcome of the 2024 election. But I think it's only important for us to not cast an opinion, but rather to look at what kind of responses we see from the public, and especially those that look at the MK party as the party that they voted for. We won't be able to know that, if people are being open and don't have any qualms about telling us who they voted for, that's fine. I think you're going to have a broad, in my own opinion, and this is not empirically defined, so let's put that disclaimer on the table first. I think what happens normally is that you have loyalists and loyal voters that will still remain with the political party, and this will be no different for the MK party. But the question would be is how long that loyalty remains, or will you then get a set of voters that are loyal but just feel very disaffected and then kind of not go out and vote. And I think the experience here is what happened to the ANC in previous elections from about 2014, 2019, and of course local government elections, where people felt that they were loyal to the party, they were loyal to the organization, the principles, the values, etc., of what they stood for, but they just didn't feel the fit there when they didn't feel that the party was representing them in voice and agency. So I think that's going to be something we have to look at in terms of the MK party.
Yeah. And then, of course, you have the element of the EFF, Floyd Shivambu, joining the MK party. He said it is in the best interest for the Progressive Caucus in Parliament, listening to Julius Malema's last press briefing, referencing one of the youth leaders of the EFF, arguing that as far as they are concerned, he agrees with that leader, the youth leader, that when it comes to the Progressive Caucus, it must only remain in Parliament. It shouldn't go to the other legislative spheres, whether it is local government or even at a provincial level. How then should we understand what the Progressive Party means with the EFF in it, considering the fallout over Floyd Shivambu's resignation?
Well, I haven't really read the statement or I've seen the press briefing, but I haven't really read what the youth leader said. But I think it's a bit difficult to only remain within the caucuses of Parliament as the opposition or part of the Progressive Caucus only in Parliament, because we have 3 tiers of government. We have national, provincial, and local government, and all tiers have legislative elements and legislative institutions. I mean, so at the national level, yes, it represents the big picture, and it's the accountability of the GNU and so forth, and other accountability mechanisms of institutions of the state. But at the same time, in the provinces and the local government level, you have legislatures as well, particularly at provincial level, and within the you have a legislature, and of course in local government you have the council. So I think it's a bit difficult to just retain one level of space for you as a caucus, as an opposition, as the Progressive Caucus, because you must remember that the arteries of our body politic is actually the local government level. And what we've been seeing in the media and the news recently around the challenges of extortion networks and mafia groups, people that have been subject to those kinds of criminal activity, questions around accountability around your electricity grid, your electricity connections. I mean, just the whole kind of developmental architecture. You have to have accountability of your councillors as well. And if you're not going to be there to create that kind of accountability and ask those awkward questions and raise the oversight role, then it's very difficult to only do that at the national level or in the Parliament. I would be interested to see how that model manifests, or how it actually articulates itself if it's only in Parliament. And I think to qualify which Parliament is only at the national level or as well as the provincial level, and what about your accountability and your representation as opposition within council? Because we're seeing what's happening now with the city of Johannesburg, where some of those dynamics around who gets into the council is also about the kind of dynamics of how coalition is playing out at local government level.
Thank you so much for your time. Political analyst there, Sanusha Naidu. And of course, that press briefing by the leader of the MK party will be later on today. And maybe will give us some sort of insights as well around the role that Floyd Shivambu as well as Mzwanele Manye will be playing in that party.